Namaste and welcome to our continuing series Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste, Narad.
Namaste, Amina.
Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste to everybody and welcome.
We are happy to continue part 18 on the current affairs. Today we will be discussing the environmental crisis. And as usual, you may send your questions beforehand at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com, or you may address your question during our conversation in the chat box. Firstly, I will read some questions that are pending from last time. Rajan, my question pertains to Modi, whom you have called as the disruptor, which I agree, but when I watched Pran Pratishtha of Ram Temple, I felt that he, as the Raja, king or political party leader, should not have done the ceremony himself, but should have made it happen through the Purohits as per Shahasra. As he was the person conducting it alone, it makes me think that he is now orchestrating a mass hypnosis movement towards a deity which may not be of a supramental or in a higher consciousness in the name of Rama. This is something else. Your thoughts about it?
Okay. So there were two questions pertaining to our discussion last time, and I think it's important we sort these before moving with our theme today. Rajan's question that because Modi is a political party leader, technically like a king, he should have done the invocation of the presence, infusion of life of the presence through a Purohita according to the Shastra. Purohit is a priest, technically. Shastra is the teaching or text or rule book, so to say. I want to take the perspective a little deeper. It would have been true of most politicians, what you say, because most politicians do not live a pure life. They lie, they cheat, they live by standards which are some of the lowest of human values. And so for such a person, even to prepare for such a ceremony, to purify the consciousness is extremely difficult, very likely impossible, because it would take years of work. Modi stands out as a very different kind of politician. From the beginning, he has lived as a monk, as an ascetic. Even when he entered formally the political space as an activist, he lived as an ascetic in service. He has been, in the ascetic tradition, celibate, not owning anything, although technically he has a bank account and he has one flat in his name. But after becoming chief minister, all the money that he earned as chief minister in Gujarat, when he demitted office as chief minister, he transferred the entire amount to the fund for the free education for the girl children of the drivers of the government of Gujarat. And that's it. Owns nothing, back down to zero in his account. Whatever it was, he just went back to whatever it was. And he's living like this. Not only that, the standards he has set for himself, to not tell a lie or to not do things which are contrary to his ethics or to his morality, etc. You will find all through, even in his politicking, while there is an element of bluster in the way one presents for the sake of the crowds, at no point you will find that he resorts to cheating or even vocabulary which is crude or coarse. I'm sorry to make the comparison, and it may not be justified, but nevertheless, if you see even example of Trump, the speech he will use even in the politics, when he describes or criticizes somebody in the worst possible way, he will say something like, it's a disgrace. But he will never drop below that in the political speeches. Modi is of an altogether different order because of the very strong spiritual orientation of his consciousness from the beginning. And as I've mentioned in my introduction about his life, twice he wanted to become a monk. He went to the Ramakrishna mission. They refused him. And so he lived as a monk nevertheless. And as it came to this particular temple, it's not that he is going to do this for all temples. It's as if he dedicated his entire life, going back to some 40-50 years to this particular cause, and even he took a vow, this is 30 years ago, that he would not set foot in Ayodhya until the temple was finally, the land was liberated for from the alien rule. And that's when he went, and that's barely 3 years ago. So these show you a certain level of clarity and purity of thought and purpose, which brings him very close to what we would call the priest. What is special about the priest is that you live by a higher standard, you're supposed to. Fact is, most priests don't. The few who do, yes, there is a difference and one can feel it in their vibes. Modi definitely comes into that category. Why he would do it? I'm saying it was a commitment. He is more a politician by accident than by choice. He never chose to enter politics. He was selected and pushed into the seat. And then he did a great job because he ruled like a king who owns nothing and who's only dedicated to serving the people. Now, whatever his flaws may be, we are not here to discuss that. I'm putting it in the context of this purpose. So effectively, he is one person who can be a Purohit, a priest. What is Purohita? The word in Sanskrit is the one who stands before the Lord. Now, it so happens, symbolically, my ego is unable to, so there is somebody who is less egocentric, who becomes as if a representative in the ritual ceremonies. Somebody is more pure than I can be for the purpose of the ceremony and so on. But if I am myself of that value, there is nothing wrong in my taking the place of the priest. And as per Shastras, Shastras are more a kind of an optimization texts, that here for this purpose, these are the optimum circumstances. They are not rigid, they are not in that sense absolute. They are not the word of God as it is in the Abrahamic traditions. They are rather the gathered knowledge with a rationale behind and built on a certain value system and let's say technology of the human psychology. And so they do serve a purpose as indicators. They are not absolute. And so it does not mean that you have to be wearing whatever it is, shaved head and all that. Those are secondary. They are even tertiary aspects. The Shastra describes the state of purity that is required to be able to engage in an action that demands a level of purity. So if you see, Modi himself did not do it trivially. He was on a complete fast for 11 days, drinking only coconut water. He ate no food as a way of purification. Now, I'm not going to say this is a spiritual purification. It is certainly a psychological and health purification, and to the extent that it destabilizes the inner consciousness, it opens you to a higher, which is the basis for many of these fasting practices in the spiritual traditions. It opens you to a higher grade of access, but by destabilizing the body. Well, he went through all that. He did everything required by a priest who is going to do that ceremony. So as I see it, there's nothing wrong there. And as far as orchestrating a mass movement, let me put it this way. Every politician uses charisma. If not, you cannot be a politician. So if there's a mass hypnosis, which is what charisma is about, I would rather it be in the hands of somebody who lives by higher standards than one who is only duping the people and taking them off track. So again, there's no problem there if there is an impact on the collective. And certainly, I would put it this way, when you saw the ceremony, if you felt the purity of the presence, if you felt the deep aspiration of the people represented, for Modi to have done the ceremony was unique and even fully justified because he stood there as representing the Indian people. You put it in the hands of a priest because you are not competent, then the priest was not selected by us. We do not know even his values. We do not know by what standards he lives. Here's a man we chose by overwhelming majority in India because we trusted him. He's lived up to those values as far as we can see, and then he puts it expressing or even representing us. So there's something very unique, and I said it is not common for such events to take place, and that's why I quoted from Sri Aurobindo where he mentions the three great names from tradition who would sit on the thrones. And I believe Modi, I do not know if I can compare with those names, but Modi certainly represents one such. A person of a high spiritual foundation, but now sitting on the chairs of the kings. So it becomes in the tradition, if you want to connect to tradition, is what we call the Rajarshi. The rishis who were kings, who embodied in themselves not only a higher spiritual consciousness and knowledge, but also the power to wield it in the rule of a people or a nation or a country. So these are my thoughts, and I think whatever he did was in the best of tradition. Beyond that, it doesn't matter. We go to the next.
Tutun, he wrote, Tagore wrote a letter in 1937 clarifying that Jana Gana Mana was not composed for George V. Tagore further writes, in parentheses, I have hailed in the song Jana Gana Mana that dispenser of India's destiny, who guides through all rise and fall, the wayfarers, he who shows the people the way. Quotes the following from that letter. Neither the fifth, nor the sixth, nor any George could be the maker of human destiny through the ages. At minute 39, Sraddhalu is very much wrong. Tagore himself has clarified this in his own handwriting. The Sarati, the eternal charioteer mentioned in Jana Gana Mana, is Shri Krishna of the Gita. This propaganda by a section of right wing has already been falsified.
Okay. So I know the issue that Tutun has raised is a cause for a lot of, let's say, discomfort for many. I want to put it in a context, and I'm going to be somewhat direct in this because that's the whole purpose of this series. I could give an example. When I was criticizing some of the Abrahamic religions and I described this as a golden cage and a box, etc., it does not mean that I don't recognize the value of the religion and the tradition, and I've highlighted that also. And what is important for us is not to stop short. One could have, and as most people do, take a very neutral poise saying there's a grain of spirituality in every religion. That being said, you can become quiet. If that be the case, then what does it matter if you switch from one religion to another? Is there a difference? And if there's a difference, then please highlight that so that you can make a reasonable choice if every religion has a grain of truth. So my purpose in the current affairs series is precisely to cut through the politically correct stance and go to issues which are central to the immediate future of humanity. For the future of humanity, it is not useful to say that every religion has a grain of truth, so we can be quiet and not worry about it. We have to recognize certain religions are extremely narrow in their boxification. Some are more wide and open. Some have an issue with being stuck in the past. Some are actually progressive or are attempting to make a progress, and so on. And again, what are the things required for the future? The universality required which breaks the boundaries. How many religions can do that? Especially when they're defined by a book. So my criticisms were in that direction. So again, here I want to put the observation of Tutun quoting Tagore, saying that he did not mean in his chant in the song that King George V would be the maker of destiny of humanity or of the Indian people. Yes, of course he did not. But the context is very different, and you must understand this. And I'm going to quote, and that's why I'm going to quote exactly so that there is no confusion here. And I've put the links also so people will not have a problem there. And understand the time. The time at that point was when the British ruled India with an iron hand. The mind of the people was enslaved. When Sri Aurobindo spoke of complete freedom from colonial rule, people called him an extremist. People, meaning everybody. It was so daring to even demand this or even to conceive of this. Nobody had conceived of it. Gandhi was nowhere in the picture. He came much later when already the turn had been made. So let's look at the situation even from Tagore's point of view. When he was awarded the Nobel Prize, he accepted it. He returned it when the Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place, when the British massacred a large number of unarmed people who were celebrating a normal traditional celebration, and they were all gunned down in the most horrible way. So let me quote now from Tagore's own words of what happened. How did this song come to be written? And we see what he has to say. Let me first quote from the newspapers of the time. So the newspaper of the time, you find the Englishman, December 28, 1911. The proceedings began with the singing by Rabindranath Tagore of a song specially composed by him in honor of the emperor. The Statesman, same date, wrote, the Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore sang a song composed by him specially to welcome the emperor. The Indian, next date, wrote, when the proceedings of the Indian National Congress began on Wednesday, 27 December, a Bengali song in welcome of the emperor was sung. A resolution welcoming the emperor and empress were also adopted unanimously. Now you must understand, unanimous. There's not one person who's saying, no, we don't want this emperor to come. They cannot. If there were, they would just be put in jail. You must understand the mentality in 1911. You are looking to the British as literally in what is called the Stockholm Syndrome. Here are those who are giving us food and survival. Because just before that, 50 years of famines, which were provoked by the British, had driven the people to collapse economically and psychologically. You would die if you did not accept the British rule. Now, unanimous means it includes Tagore's presence. He is there singing, and on an occasion which is very clearly described by all the reports. Now, today's report, I'm again quoting now from Delhi University's Pradeep Kumar Datta, says, the reports were based on understandable ignorance since the Anglo-Indian press had neither the linguistic abilities nor the interest to be accurate. Actually, two songs were sung. There is no connection between composition of Jana Gana Mana and George V, except that the song was sung at the event which was which also facilitated the king. Now, this is today's cover-up of a reality which is inconvenient today because remember, I'm not criticizing Tagore or anybody at that point who unanimously praised King George V. Unanimously, please understand. It's not a criticism of them, it's the reality of the situation. And what the press said at that time was the reality. Everybody knew it. It's not like somebody independently in one newspaper has misunderstood because he does not understand. The context of the singing was that it was praising the king. And so now comes the question, why did he write it? When did he write it? And so again I'm going to quote him. What does he say? So Tagore says, in a letter of 1937 to the bibliographer, editor and annotator of his work, he wrote, a certain high official in His Majesty's service, who was also my friend, had requested that I write a song of felicitation towards the emperor. Now understand, the request has come for writing a song for that occasion. And it's come from an official of His Majesty who is a friend. Now, you could say, why is he a friend? Well, this is the reality. You have to understand. The request simply amazed me. It caused a great stir in my heart. So obviously there is a conflict. In response to that great mental turmoil, I pronounced the victory in Jana Gana Mana of that Bhagya Vidhata, God of Destiny of India, who has from age after age held steadfast the reins of India's chariot through rise and fall, through the straight path and the curved. That Lord of Destiny, the reader of the collective mind of India, that perennial guide could never be George V, George VI or any other George. Even my official friend understood this about the song. After all, even if his admiration for the crown was excessive, he was not lacking in simple common sense. So, on the request of this friend, who is an official, a high official of His Majesty's service, Tagore writes this poem, fulfilling the requirement, but at the same time in his mind he directs it to the God of Destiny of India. But he words it in such a way that it has a dual use. Had he said this is addressed, let's say, to Sri Krishna, as the Lord of the Charioteer, etc., had he said it's Sri Krishna and put the word Sri Krishna, it would have been rejected. He would not have been accepted as the one who wrote the song. They would have gone to somebody else and had someone else write a song. He had been given the honor, but the honor created within him a conflict because at the same time he does not want to sing it to that king. So in his heart he formulates in this way, but it's carefully formulated. You read the translation of his own. He has himself translated. And if you think about it, he has deliberately used this very unclear language or double-use language. Thou art the ruler of the minds of all people, dispenser of India's destiny. The name rouses the hearts of Punjab, Sindh, Gujarat, Maratha, Dravid, Orissa, Bengal. It echoes in the hills of India and Himalayas, mingles in the music of Jamuna and Ganga, and is chanted by the waves of the Indian Sea. They pray for thy blessings and sing thy praise. The saving of all people waits in thy land, thou dispenser of India's destiny. Victory, victory, victory to thee. Now, nowhere in this you will find an explicit sense of to whom it is addressed. And if it is to address to God, why are you speaking of echoes in the hills of India and Himalayas, your name? Mingles in the music of Jamuna and Ganga, chanted by the waves of the Indian Sea. It doesn't make sense. So, if you understand that there is a dual use, without which the song would never have been accepted for that purpose, which for him was a great occasion of and a mark of respect, which is why he says in his own words, the request simply amazed me, but it created a stir in the heart. So he's found a way to resolve it. And he says, obviously, in my mind, I'm not thinking of George V, I'm speaking of this, to whom I've addressed it. Nevertheless, it was written for that occasion, it was sung on that occasion. This was my point. In my wording, I was very clear, because I know these facts. I was very clear to say that the text was written for the occasion, according to Tagore's own words, and it was sung on the occasion, according to his own words and according to all historians. There's no doubt about that. And I'm going to quote again, because this is, since I'm quoting from this person who, I've put the link, it's a modern historian. He says, he's asked, well, did those lines mean the King of England? He says, of course not. It would be sacrilege to say that. Yes, in modern times, not in those times. If you're saying that the poem pays tribute to King George V, no way. Tagore was totally opposed to British rule, especially after Jallianwala Bagh. That's when that massacre happened. That's when he returned his Nobel medal. Now remember, this is some 10 years later. Especially after Jallianwala Bagh, that's more than 10 years later. That means here he's opposed. Obviously, every Indian was opposed. But nobody could think that even it was possible. They had to subjugate themselves to the reality of the situation. And so, for me, that's not a problem at all. And it's not a criticism of Tagore either. And that's when nobody had a hope. It's only when Sri Aurobindo brought up this ideal and started organizing and working for it, what was considered impossible. All these people turned to him and said, here at last is a hope. And that's why Tagore addressed that great poem to Sri Aurobindo, also saying that we wait for you to come back from your withdrawal to Pondicherry, and India is waiting for you, and so on. So understand that there's a modern attempt to cover it up because it's inconvenient to think in these terms, but it's coming from a complete wrong understanding. And there's one more point I wanted to make. The news reports were not wrong at all. They were actually based on the reality which was known to everybody at that time. And Tagore was selected because he was a friend of this person, but also he was at that time reputed, and it put him into a limelight in a certain way, and so on. So I won't go further into this question. The point I had made was the song itself was written for the occasion, sung on the occasion, and therefore, although whatever may have been the intent in Tagore's mind, my criticism is of the song itself replacing what was Vande Mataram, the mantra given for India's liberation. That was discarded, and this song, which by reference at least of its occasion, the first release of the song, the cause for its being written was King George V. So it becomes a symbol of a mind which is still enslaved. And I'm looking at it symbolically. It does not matter whether you keep this song or not. The song itself is anachronism because it speaks of Sindh, Punjab and Sindh. After partition, there is no Sindh in India. Even the Punjab referred to is the Punjab which is in Pakistan. So the song does not even represent, or you may say, well, it hopes for a unification of India. Yeah, maybe that's a way to look at it. But certainly it does not represent the reality of today's states. So as a song, it does not address itself to the soul of India. One can say implicit, but this is how it is. So sorry for the discomfort that it may cause, but again, look at it purely from a historical perspective. Understand the mindset of the people then, and it's not a problem. Similarly, Veer Savarkar is criticized today because he praised Hitler. A lot of freedom fighters praised Hitler because he was fighting the British, and they thought, here's somebody who could ally with us. And it was the case also with the song Jana Gana Mana, that it became, even it was brought as a national anthem, not because of Rabindranath Tagore, it became suggested as a national anthem because of the freedom fighter who was the INC, Indian National Congress, his name slips my mind, Subhash Chandra Bose, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, 1937, he proposed this as the country's national anthem, and interestingly, it was played in 1942 in Hamburg in Germany with an orchestra. And that's when it was proposed formally as a national anthem for India. Think about it. Happening under Hitler's rule, that you have it played in Hamburg, India's national anthem being released there and then absorbed into India. If you make these associations, you will have a lot of problems with this song. It was under Hitler's blessing that it was accepted as India's national anthem. Think about that, 1942. And then it's accepted in 1947. Isn't that weird? So I'm discarding all this because I'm looking at the reality of the situation then. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was fighting for India's freedom. He had allied with Hitler because he thought that would be a lineup against England. If we did not have Sri Aurobindo's words stating clearly that Hitler had aligned to an Asura, we would have been equally confused, isn't it? And that required a certain deeper understanding. And that became obvious only much later when the actual circumstances of what happened at the end of the war became obvious and so on. So I think with that I'm going to drop this subject and we'll move to the important theme for today. The question.
Sumana is writing, I'm following the current affairs series with great interest. It has been a real eye-opener for me. It helped me to understand the hidden forces behind the scenes, their motives, and their ways of action. So thank you very much for these open and elaborate sessions. I'm wondering if you would touch upon the climate change topic, as it looks like that is going to be another area the Asuric forces are likely to twist and distort.
Okay. So this is going to be our theme for today, which will be the whole climate crisis and the full picture around it. There are two comments in the chat box, very important. I'm sorry, I have to make a correction. Sumana says, yes, Tagore rejected the knighthood. Not the Nobel, sorry. Yes, he rejected the knighthood. And Parash is asking, since the temple was not complete, how can you have installation of the deity within? Yes, that's one of the arguments which was put by those who were critical of Modi or critical of the temple itself being inaugurated, irrespective of Modi. But that was not correct because the temple itself is being built in several phases. The first phase is complete. After that, you build things around it. It's not central to the temple. The sanctum sanctorum and the entire sacred space of the temple itself is complete, and therefore there is no issue there. Even otherwise, from a purely spiritual point of view, you look at the Matri Mandir, even before the Matri Mandir was fully completed, even in its external, just the ball aspect. We had people going to the center and you could feel the presence building up. Of course, after the formal completion, the presence could enormously, greatly amplify. But this is just to put in context about the story of completion. No, there was a completion of the temple. So we come now to the topic for today, and I hope this will not be too controversial for most of us. I will have to rely on science as far as possible, backing it with a lot of links which I have already put online. And let's plunge straight into this. And again, I will apologize for stating certain things which need to be said very firmly. Out there is a panic being created through the media. And those of you who have been following this part of the series on current affairs, at least now you'll be able to recognize when the media is orchestrating a message or playing you for a fool by hammering away a message across the board. So one of the forms in which the message comes, climate change is threatening the very Earth's survival. You have to do something. It's imminent. Everything is going to be destroyed. Everything will collapse. There will be runaway heating of the Earth, and carbon dioxide is going to shoot up. and suddenly you will suffocate because everything will warm up, all the glaciers will end, will melt, all the animals will die, the trees will die, and sea levels will rise, etc. The key element of this panic alarmism is that the air is heating up because of carbon dioxide produced by human industrial activity. So the core question is, first, does carbon dioxide produce heating? Yes, but we will see the full picture. Second, is that carbon dioxide being produced primarily by human being, and is that the root cause of the heating, or are there other causes also which could be producing the heating? And there we come to a very different picture. And then as a result, will the sea level rise within a decade that most of the islands are going to drown? That's the story being given to you. If you've actually looked at the data, and I'm now old enough to have heard this story of climate change, it started as global warming in the 1990s. And each time they said in 10 years, all those islands will be in the Pacific Ocean, will go underwater because sea levels will rise. 30 years have passed. Not a single island has gone underwater. Yes, there have been the occasional land rising and falling, which is completely different from sea level rising and falling. In fact, if you take a photograph, let's say of any monument 100 years ago, and I've seen a photograph of in New York, of the Statue of Liberty. The water level when it was built, because it's an island in the middle of the water level when it was built, and that same season you take the water level today, you cannot make out a difference. Now, depending on what you're reading, if you read the newspapers, they will tell you it's going to rise by several meters. When? 10 years first they said, then they told us 20 years, then they said 50 years, then they tell you 100 years. How many millimeters has it actually risen in the last 30 years? Probably 1 or 2, and even that is in doubt. And I'll explain to you why. All the cities on the shores will go underwater in 10 years. That's what I've heard in 1990. 30 years later, none has gone underwater. Hurricanes and cyclones will go stronger, will be more destructive. There'll be food shortages. Yes, food shortages, but it has nothing to do with the carbon dioxide. And the hurricanes are no different. In fact, my impression living in Pondicherry is that they used to be far worse 20 or 30 years ago. But what is different today is that you have panic messages coming up. Oh, there's this cyclone coming, and because of that it was sad, it was disgusting even. In the ashram, the darshan was cancelled for 5th of December. It was cancelled because 5 days before somebody in the government said, oh, there's going to be a cyclone after 5 days. There was no cyclone. It was completely clear, bright sunny day. You could still have had the darshan, but it was cancelled. In the past, we have had severe cyclones and real cyclones with heavy rains, and we have always had the darshan because it's a spiritual event. We don't confuse that with superficiality. And in this way, they have trivialized it. And this is part of the harm being done in the ashram. I mentioned it last time. There is more to say, but maybe not the occasion. Food shortages, yes, there are food shortages. From what? From the fact that you are not having enough bees and birds or butterflies to pollinate the flowers. So they're speaking of drones which they will create to pollinate flowers to replace the bees. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide. So they said animals, polar bears, penguins will die from being unable to adjust. Yes, some of them are dying, but for completely different reasons. Because of overfishing by human beings. Or because of human beings killing them, driving them to extinction. Trees would not be able to bear flowers or fruits from early or late summer or winter, whatever the logic may be at that point. Yes, that is true, but again, for completely unconnected reasons. And finally, models show that the Earth will become unlivable in a few centuries and heat up like Venus. Completely false. It all depends. A model is a mathematical thing. You can tweak with the mathematics and you can make it appear like anything. You can demonstrate that the Earth will become frozen in a century if you just tweak with the model. The models are only as relevant as the extent to which you form them accurately, and none of the models match with each other. They all point in different directions. We do not have stable models. What they actually do is they pick a model that suits the current need for the propaganda and just highlight it. And interestingly, and I'll come to this, one of the models in 1910 actually said The earth will cool for the next 5 years and then it will warm up again. It just shows you how ridiculous the models are. But we'll come to all that also shortly. What is the problem with models? So, with all this alarmism, climate alarmism, yes, there is a problem. But it's not what is being spoken about. The root cause we are taught is that carbon dioxide is poisoning the earth, and other greenhouse gases such as methane produced by cows, animals and human beings, by the way, is creating a greenhouse gas effect, and somehow it is trapping the heat, and as a result the earth is going to get very warm and everything is going to melt. Is it true? I'm going to touch upon this shortly, but first I want to look at the full picture. The solutions offered. Once you've said greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, okay, what do? Stop industrial growth. Stop burning so-called fossil fuels. No, they don't have anything to do with fossils. Stop burning trees. Yes, okay, but look at what's actually happening from the government side. Cutting trees, we'll come to that. Cut down carbon emissions in your country and at an individual level. And they are speaking of carbon footprint. Your entire body is made of carbon. You want to eliminate carbon footprint, you will end up having to eliminate your body. So what you do is you say, how much carbon are you producing? Based on what? Well, you used a toothpaste or a toothbrush. You used a mobile phone for the electricity use for the mobile phone. You wore slippers made of rubber. You go back to the production of the rubber. And everything is being linked to carbon production somewhere along the way. That becomes your carbon footprint. Now think about this. Think about how ridiculous it is. Everything you need to live a basic comfortable life, when mapped to carbon, now becomes your carbon footprint. And as a result, the fact that you're alive is your carbon footprint. So effectively reduce, go into poverty, reduce your comforts, use less and less until you go to vanishing point of self-extinction. That's when you will go near zero. Or you produce carbon neutralizing processes, which means what? Because carbon is your enemy. Remember, that's the material which makes your body, which makes the life forms of nature and the trees. So what do? Develop new technologies for carbon sequestering to extract carbon dioxide from the air and bury it underground to save the planet. Now, I've actually looked at all this, and sometimes it's so ridiculous. You have to wonder how people are so gullible, or are the people presenting it to you so sure of themselves that they can laugh their way to the bank and play you to stupidity. Yes, that seems to be the case, and both seems to be the case. So there's this whole technology which was being promoted in the newspapers. Finally, this company, which is a new startup, has created a technology. They will pump air, extract carbon dioxide, release the air by removing the carbon dioxide, and then put it through a chemical process to bind it into matter and then pump it into the earth. Brilliant technology. Okay? How is it going to be powered? With electricity. Coming from where? Gasoline, petrol, solar energy, wind power, whatever it is. None of those can give enough. Finally, it will go back to nuclear power or wind or gasoline. But think about how stupid this is. This is exactly what a tree does. Why do you even need to develop such a stupid technology which is power hungry when you could just plant 100 trees? Nowhere in this whole narrative of climate change do they tell you plant trees to solve the problem. In fact, it goes the reverse. Bill Gates says cut down trees and bury them. I will come to that shortly. But this makes you wonder that you're being played for a fool. Bill Gates says cut down trees and bury them. I couldn't get the link, but you will see. You just find Bill Gates and bury trees and you'll find the article. And he's pumping millions of dollars to have people go around in forest cutting trees. And then instead of making beautiful furniture or houses out of them, you bury them as they are underground. And that's how you've taken out carbon from the air and buried it underground. Do you see how stupid this is? How perverse it is? You kill life, basically. The more trees you cut and bury underground, the more you're sequestering carbon, supposedly. Whereas if the tree lives, well, it's also converting carbon dioxide into oxygen during the day, but at night it releases carbon dioxide, so you better kill the tree. Kill all life eventually. Stop eating meat and kill all the cows. That's another message that comes. Because cows produce methane when they burp food. Human beings produce methane as part of the digestive process. All life forms produce methane in some form or other. In fact, that's one of the markers for life on Mars. If you found these seasonal variations of methane, it would be evidence of life. So when you say kill anything that produces methane, you're basically saying kill all life. The problem with this whole approach is the common man does not know that behind it is this cabal and this very ugly satanic energy that wants to destroy life on earth, that hates nature. Go back to those talks of the first few sessions of our discussion, because that is so critical. If you have not understood that, you will not understand this. There's an entire elite that hates nature, that wants to destroy all life, and they're under influence of these asuric energies. And this is the agenda that they're promoting, of course, with the power of the media and its hypnosis. And then, immediately, before you can kill all the animals, before you can bury all the trees, before you can make you poor so that you don't have a carbon footprint, what's the first thing you do is make a carbon tax. And the carbon tax basically says, because you are using up, you're creating carbon dioxide or using up producing carbon dioxide through your existence, you have to pay a tax, which will go now to offset the carbon dioxide. How? Because it will go to fund all these crazy technology companies, which are owned by cabal entities, players. They just get millions of dollars pumping in, and then they go sink after a few years. Very quietly, it's all gone. It was basically money distributed amongst themselves. You'll find the same thing happening with many of the startups today, including startups such as, for example, the startup which was doing Hyperloop. If you look at the whole story of how they collapsed, they all went into partying. The entire upper management was partying like crazy with the monies which had come in, which was all cabal money being pumped to reward them for participation in other ways and to bury the technology. And then they sunk. That's it. So, carbon tax is the trick being played on you, except it's being done so cleverly you don't even know it's being done. Everything is being taxed a certain percentage. When you buy it, by this carbon tax process. You buy an airplane ticket, there is a carbon tax. I think it's 5% if I recall right. But that means basically all your tickets have gone up by 5%. And where does this money go? It's not going to the airline either. It's going to one of these carbon tax bodies, and then it is traded publicly, like in the stock market. So, when you start carbon trading, carbon credits trading, you can get carbon credit from all of the above, whatever I've described so far. You kill animals, you'll get carbon credit. You cut trees, you'll get carbon credit. When you plant trees and grow them, you can also claim carbon credit, but different values. But with that carbon credit, what happens? You get money, but somebody is buying the carbon credit from you. So you say, oh, I'm earning money. For what? For the taxes which you have paid anyway, you're getting it back in some percentage. But what happens up there? Watch. By denying myself the carbon production, let's say now I'm going to reduce my carbon footprint, the credit I have got is paid to me, let's say a certain amount of money, by somebody very wealthy who now flies his jet freely. And he says, look, I have paid money to all these people who are going to live poor just so that I can live rich. So effectively, it's creating a stronger separation between the rich and the poor. The poor become poorer with a little bit of money coming back from the taxes they're already paying for the higher prices. And that money is, or rather that carbon credit is now bought by somebody else who owns it and now can live the luxury without care for carbon issues. It's a trick, a sleight of hand by which you're being taxed. The richer grow rich, the poor grow poorer. And all this while the carbon is being traded. So companies buy and sell carbon, they anticipate the price of carbon credits will go up or low, and based on that they will make projections. So On this carbon credits market, you can even make speculative positions and so earn a lot of money and so on. Now, if you have all heard of this person called Al Gore, who became very famous, I think in 2006 or 7, he put out a video based on a lecture that he gave about the crisis, climate crisis, which said that within 10 years there'll be runaway climate problems and sea levels would rise and so on. It played on your emotions with a bit of superficial science. The result was he was given the Nobel Prize, and his investment in carbon credit companies shot up. He earned some $500 million, if I remember right, 400 or $500 million. He became super wealthy overnight. That's the cabal rewarding its own in these ways. So the reality is that with all this fear mongering, you have built up also a base of young people who are willing to become activists. So now you're funding activists to destroy the industrial base in the name of protecting the earth from carbon. And it's not a problem. Remember, carbon is a life cycle substance. As a result, through these vandalisms, you cause shortages, you raise prices, put pressure on politicians. Now watch what the newspaper does. It says, we demand climate action, and nothing has happened. And they tell you, oh, finally this climate meeting failed. United Nations climate meeting. I've been to those, I've seen the agendas. It's all about opportunities for making money because of climate activism. So what is the opportunity for making more money because of this issue or that issue of climate? And that's all they discuss. Nobody discusses seriously about anything real. But the only thing being pushed is all countries should agree to cut back carbon production. What does that mean? So shift to renewable energies, for example. Except that costs so much more that the cost of that energy is actually far greater. So much greater that it is ridiculous even to use it. You, let's say, build a wind turbine or solar power. The only way it becomes effective cost-wise is either you're in a very isolated place where it's impossible to have petroleum being brought. For example, on an island which is completely cut off, you put a wind turbine, yes, it works, cost effective. Or it is heavily subsidized by the government. So today, if you put up a wind power plant, government is paying a large burden of the cost, which then reduces the price of the wind power plant to something comparable to what you are getting from other sources, let's say coal-fired power plants. By bringing it to that level or slightly below, you have this sense that you've done something good for the environment. But remember, that's subsidized. Now, two things will happen. First, the subsidy itself is coming from the oil economy. So, oil prices go up effectively, or the cost of energy from oil will go up gradually, or it will be taxed by other means, which means your cost of living will go up, or eventually the government will say, well, now that we have all shifted to renewable energy sources, it's not fair that we continue to subsidize, we must remove subsidy. And they'll start removing the subsidy, and with that your other sources which are cheaper fuel goes away, and now this cost goes up. Either way, in every way, cost will go up, if not now, in 10 years. So there's a fundamental problem with all these so-called renewable energies. Unless those technologies become extremely efficient. For example, solar power with solar cells currently are at an efficiency level of less than 20%. In the United States, the government has passed a law, and it works on the patent office. If anybody produces a solar cell with higher than 20% efficiency, or a motor with higher than 20%, or whatever, the government has the right under National Security Act to seize the patent and make it secret. And this act has been in place, I think, from 1971. I have seen over the last 30 years news items where they said, this person has broken the barrier of 20%. And I'm waiting for it to appear. It never appears because it gets bought up, the patent gets bought up and gets buried. So there is at the same time the cabal interest to make sure these technologies are inefficient. Why? Because they want you to be dependent on petroleum power, that's how they earn much of their income. But if you move to solar energy, And you will see how the same companies were resisting solar power until they came in and claimed ownership of the basic technologies. And then they said, now please shift to solar power, of course with government subsidies. So there's a lot of the taxes you pay which come back into the solar energy that you're using. So again, it does not make sense when you think about it. But at least it's a start by getting people to think differently. I would have preferred rather if that less than 20% efficiency solar cell was pushed to 40% or 50% efficiency. Then this would make sense, because suddenly the cost of solar power would drop to a half and would actually be competitive without these fake subsidies. But that's difficult for the moment because the technology is being bought up as quickly as it's being developed. So this is just to give you a picture of the reality of the pressure created on politicians. And finally, when the politicians act, we are the ones saying, because of the media programming, act, do something to save the earth. And grandiosely they come and say, now we put a tax, your prices are going to go up, but we will save the earth. Except nowhere has the money gone to actually save the earth, because carbon is not destroying the earth. Nor reducing carbon is going to save the earth. That's what we're going to discuss next. So that money is going somewhere else altogether. It's pumping into industries or other interests of the politicians which have nothing to do with saving the earth. So this is the game being played, and we are all part of the victims. We are all victims of this. One more thing which you saw recently, cut back on oil production. This was the push in the COP meeting of United Nations in Dubai, that they agreed finally that in so many years they will start reducing oil consumption across the world. Now what does that mean in practice? Let's say you are going to your job riding a moped. Production of oil goes down. Price of oil goes up. Are you going to travel 10% less because the price has gone up 10%? You still have to get to the same office. You're just going to end up paying a price which will be so much more. It'll just squeeze into your savings so much more. Nobody can realistically reduce use of the oil unless replaced by technologies which are significantly more cheap or reliable. The problem with solar energy, of course, in certain climates, in the northern Europe, for example, it does not work beyond a point. In winter, it does not work. So Germany, which shifted to solar power dramatically, I think some 10 years ago, began to shut down its nuclear power. Well, the last few years they have had power cuts in various places. France is having power cuts, and they're being programmed to accept this as normal, which has never happened for decades. And there's even a pressure now to restart the nuclear power. It's not a solution either. I will come to what the solutions are later. But first I'm showing you the complexity of the issue and the way we are being fooled. For that Dubai conference, or for all the COP conferences of the last 20 years nearly, the people who told you that you have to cut down on carbon dioxide production or oil consumption, etc., they all flew in private jets. I remember reading a news report in the Egypt COP meeting, which is, 3 or 4 years ago. They had some 200 plus private jets which had come from all over the world of the speakers in the conference. These are the people pompously thumping the desk and saying, you should cut down your carbon footprint. They don't, and they don't care, because they know the game. They're the ones playing you. So this is the reality, and cutting back on oil consumption is not going to help much other than raising prices. Because at the end of the day, let's say you have shifted to solar power, and I have seen this in reality. You put your solar cells in every home. The cost of that, remember, is subsidized heavily by the government. The cost of that and the foreign drain of foreign exchange, because so far at least it was China which was producing solar cells. Fine, you produce them in India. The cost of production of solar cells and the waste material and the poisons that you throw out into the river and the ground to produce the solar cells is doing far more damage to nature than if you had simply burnt petrol. The chemicals used are so horrible, and they're the ones which are pure poison. Further, the waste material from that entire processing again is being dumped. It's all poisonous. When your solar cells, which have a lifetime, 10, 20 years, let's say, when they degrade, and after a while they don't function anymore or they break down. You have an entire panel. The entire panel breaks down because of one tiny cut of copper line somewhere. You replace the panel. Where does that go? Landfill, again poisonous. What do you do with it? With all the windmills, wind turbines, which have finished their life, nobody knows what to do with it. They're just piled up. And they have, I don't know, some 20,000 liters of oil or something in each of them. You still need oil to run the wind turbine. And the blades, which are made of plastic and fiberglass, which you cannot recycle. It's forever. For the next 10,000 years, you'll have the fiberglass. Buried where? In India, you cannot. In the US, there are large parts which are desert. You could still speak of burying. What do you do with it? No solution. Now, if you take into account the cost of reprocessing the fiberglass wings of the wind turbine, the cost is so prohibitively high that even with subsidy, it would not be effective. These are the realities of what is being offered to you as sustainable technologies. No, they are not. The bulk of them are not. The dam, to some extent. Of course, the damage to the local ecosystem, well, once done, you can say, all right, now it won't get worse. There's a point to it. Nuclear power, the damage it does to the ecosystem is after the lifespan of the nuclear power for the next 10,000 years. So you can still say it's not in my lifetime, it will happen after. So it passes. Petroleum is still the mainstay for the bulk of humanity. And so, I'm telling you, it's not a long-term solution. Nevertheless, it is the current temporary solution. So with all this now, as the reality underlying the claims being made, look at what is being done to hammer away the message to you. First, you're told, believe the science. I've put a few links of the actual science. You must distinguish between the science and the scientists. And we'll look at the science shortly. What they're telling you actually is believe scientists, who are themselves mostly not from the domain of specialization here. So today, for example, you can do a course on climate. You're not a scientist. You've just done a course on the climate in which you have regurgitated what you were told about the climate, and you become the expert now. But the scientist is somebody who actually understands the weather and the processes of nature at its roots, and they will tell you a very different picture. And I've put a few links about that. Do look at the links. I will not elaborate here because it gets somewhat technical, but the links are presented beautifully, and I've also given a couple of links which describe the website where you'll find all the answers that you need regarding these issues and the questions. So when you say believe the science, they're not giving you the science. They're giving you the scientists who are then representatives for an agenda. They will tell you 2,000 times scientists have signed a letter saying, oh, you must act to reduce carbon. Well, there's another group of scientists, 1,000 people who signed another letter saying this is all a scam and a sham. Look at the content of the scientists and you will see the difference. The bulk of the scientists who have asked for the climate issue are either not from the field of specialization or are required to sign because they will not get their next grant for funding. Those who are from the field, the media will never speak about them because what they say is too obviously not aligned with the agenda. And I've put a link from one of these scientists who used to be one of those who promoted suppression of carbon dioxide. And today he says, when I looked at the science, I found this was completely wrong. What we were being told was completely wrong. And it tells you what was wrong and what is right. So I want you to hear it from a scientist's perspective and a real scientist who understands, and he'll give you the reasons. The politicians will say, Obama said, for example, 97% of scientists agree. False. Where did that number 97 come from? And I put a link for a video which explains how it came. There was a study of some 2,000 papers. Out of those, a proportion of 40 papers or 45 papers, of which 40 papers were aligned to this, 45 were. And out of that comes this number 97%. All the other papers which were contrary to this agenda were ignored. You'll get the full picture in the video. I will not go into detail. But just to tell you that when they make these blatant statements and everybody repeats, It's just a play of the statistics. You're being conned again. Then they put the usual labels, you're a climate denier. So I will be labeled as that because I'm saying that this carbon dioxide is not a problem. I'm not denying that there is change in the climate. I'm just saying carbon dioxide, and particularly human produced carbon dioxide, is not a critical cause of it. There are other issues. And yes, climate is changing. But again, change of climate was never a problem. It has been changing for the last few millions of years. And cycles where it has got far hotter than today, far higher carbon dioxide than today, far higher humidity than today. And plants have thrived, animals have thrived. It has never been a problem. And then it has gone much lower, much higher, much colder. We have been under ice ages for some 100,000 years. We have survived it, well, whatever difficulties might have been, but emerging from an ice age, literally the rising graph of the last 10,000 years is increasing temperatures until we hit a new ice age spike. So, if you look at the big picture, I'm not denying there's a problem, but I'm saying the problem itself is quite different from what you're being told. There is, particularly, you will see these fear, panic, hysteria mongers will target the youth. Because I can say that I've heard for the last 30 years that sea levels were going to rise and I don't see they've risen. But the young person who's just coming into their own now, being educated and say, oh my God, they don't know the past. They don't know the stories which have gone, how much you've been lied to. So they get upset. And I've seen these young people get agitated. And I saw one of these saying, oh, in so many years, it will rise 5 meters and all the places where I live now will be covered in water. No, it's not even true. You've been lied to. Even the science will not say 5 meters. So, we'll come to that. So, you'll also notice in the propaganda in the media, they'll say so many tons of carbon dioxide. You know what that means? The ton is used in volumes, not in weight. So, you've given a false impression of a huge amount. So, for example, when you buy an air conditioner for a room, this is a 3-ton AC. It's not the weight of the air conditioning. It's not the weight of the air it's pumping out. It's the volume that it will cover. So, carbon dioxide of that volume is measured in tons. Whereas, if the same article describes how much a tree absorbs carbon dioxide, they will say it is in pounds. They will not use tons. So, there is a play being made in the usage of vocabulary, and I think I've put that also as a link just to show you how you are lied to. There's another example which I've also put as a link, I think. A 10-foot ape once roamed the earth but fell victim to climate change, according to a study. So, some 300,000 years ago, there was this 10-foot ape and it became extinct. Just as you will become extinct because of climate change. That's the message. Except, remember the definition of climate change, the term used, is human-produced climate change. There were no humans supposedly at that point. So, when it became extinct, it was because of changing climate, not climate change. Changing climate is part of nature's cycles, as the dinosaurs or what else, and many other. So, you see how you are being lied to. But if you're not vigilant, it's so easy to get fooled. So, I'm giving these as examples. Now, let me share with you a history, because I've been around in this body, in this physical earth now for about 50 plus years. 1970s, all the headlines, and that's in my lifetime, all the headlines spoke of the earth entering a mini ice age. Times magazine, internationally respected in those days as an authority, had a front page of how the earth was entering an ice age. Global cooling, but ice growing everywhere. 1980, 10 years later, the shift had happened slightly. They spoke of ozone hole. In the 80s, the ozone became a big story. But strangely enough, the ozone hole formed on the southern hemisphere over the South Pole. Whereas all our industrial gases, the bulk of them are in the northern hemisphere. So why is it there and not here? Yes, there was a little bit around the north also, but so much bigger on the south. No explanation. The reason for that was actually very different. It had nothing to do, well, it has certainly an effect with industrial gases you're wasting. But why did it go south? Because of nuclear weapons. In 1956, they exploded 3 nuclear bombs high up in the atmosphere over the South Pole. There's a whole story around that which I won't go into. And it was a joint operation of US, USSR, France, England, and there was one more country. When did, in the middle of Cold War, US and USSR cooperate to explode nuclear weapons, supposedly for scientific reasons? There's a whole story behind that I won't go into now. But the result of that was, because of the release of the nuclear material in the upper atmosphere, that degraded and created the ozone hole, which still exists today. Whereas all the industrial gases we are releasing, which damage the ozone, and they do, yes, would not produce that size of a hole, and they would have produced in the northern hemisphere. So certainly what was over the northern hemisphere has reduced. The ozone depletion has reduced. So it's a good thing. But my point is, what you're seeing there, and that's the alarmist message, that hole has grown twice as big, etc., seasonally, is not to do with your industrial gases. It has other reasons. 1990s, the keyword shifted to global warming. That's when I heard it most powerfully. And they all said by the year 2000, sea levels would rise, islands would go underwater. At the same time, I read a news article, scientific study, presented in the newspaper, that said, measured from satellites in space, they find the Earth is cooling. Measured on the ground, they find the Earth is warming. So they're not sure what's really happening. And the doubt was right there. But it was called global warming. And you were told that everything would melt because everything is warming. Except 10 years down, they found they could not hold on to that term global warming anymore, because you saw no signs of warming. Instead, you had severe cold winters. So the vocabulary shifted to climate change. The game with the word climate change is, well, climate is changing all the time across millions of years, and there are cyclic changes, going far hotter and far colder than what we are at today. And the problem is, because it's climate change, climate is almost undefined. At least there's no scientific definition of climate. You have a kind of ordinary human definition saying is the general trend of the weather patterns. Please reduce that to a scientifically measurable value. Well, you cannot. So we will say, well, for the last 10 years, the seasons used to be such and such, and now suddenly it has become either hotter or colder during summer or during winter, but not throughout. Climate has changed. Climate used to be more temperate, now it's become a little more extreme. And after a few years, again, it becomes more temperate. Climate has changed again. Can you quantify it scientifically? No. And so they get away with this term climate change. If you had said global warming and then you had to say prove that the average temperature has gone up, they could not. Hence climate change became the key word from, let's say, about 2000s onwards. I'm just giving a broad picture. And again, in the year 2000, sea levels had not gone up as predicted, but they said by 2010 you'll have a crisis. It will be a runaway heating of the earth. 2010, it became crisis which will happen in 2020. 2020, it became crisis which will happen in 2030. So every time you are saying 10 years hence will be a crisis for which you must act now. Well, over the last 40 years that I have seen this, at least 30, let's say, sea levels have not risen anywhere. None of the islands have gone under. Temperatures did not go up as they had been predicted. Whatever they said 30 years ago should have happened in 30 years. It's not gone up even 1/4 of it, maybe 1/10 of it. And so I saw a study in the year 2010. Well, they said, you know what, the temperatures did not go up as we anticipated based on our models, and they were all mathematical models, because we realized the oceans are actually absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. And we did not take into account that there are these microorganisms in the seawater which actually take in the carbon dioxide and sequester it, and then they become the material for the shells, carbon, and sinks down into the sea. Or the seawater itself, as it is frothing through waves or through wind, is absorbing carbon dioxide. We didn't take that into account in our models. So now with our modified models, 2010, they said the world will become colder before it gets warmer. But it will get warmer in 100 years. So I have to now start doubting your models. Because what are the models based on? A scientific, reductionist understanding of the climate complex interactive processes of life, which you cannot quantify. You're taking certain trends, compiling them, building a certain model, and because every model is so different, all of them go completely in a different direction. You pick the model which best serves the current data, and after that, you have multiple models which fit the current data, and then you choose the one which projects in the direction that you find convenient for your messaging. That's how the game works. That's how all these models work. That's how artificial intelligence modeling works, isn't it? That's why artificial intelligence, beyond a certain point where you're describing a technology, the actual making of this in AI intelligence is more an art than a science, we are told. And the way you structure your models is your intellectual property, and that is never revealed, because then others would replicate that. So it's not a science, it's still an art. And the models here for climate are also arbitrary practically, from which you pick something which suits your agenda. So not having taken into account microorganisms, let me give you another story around this. So this is a news item I saw barely a few years ago, maybe within the last 1 year. We now find that the microbiome of the earth is absorbing carbon in humongous quantities, far more than anything we had imagined possible. And I don't remember, I'm sorry, my memory on this is a little vague, but the number was literally 4 or 5 times more than whatever we had thought even possible. And the result is suddenly all your models have become obsolete. And this is 2022 or 23 perhaps. So microbiome of soil is sequestering carbon. You do not need your crazy technologies. Ocean is sequestering your carbon. The earth as a living being, as a living organism is doing it. Trees are doing it. Just start planting more trees and stop poisoning the ocean, stop poisoning the water, stop poisoning the soil. Allow the microbiome to grow. And you're destroying the microbiome with your fertilizers and your pesticides which kill all life in the soil. That's your problem. Set that right. Come back in harmony with nature, and nature will take care of it. Carbon dioxide is a life cycle is part of life cycle. It will never poison the environment. It will never damage. Nature will balance and correct for it. For example, if, as in the past, we know that carbon dioxide was very high in the atmosphere, proportionally. At that time, plants were thriving, animals were thriving. It was the time of the dinosaurs. Earth was warmer, but they were thriving like crazy. Why? Because plants need carbon dioxide. That's how they grow, that's how they build their tissue. So why are we told, and I was in a conference once, they said, but it's well known that when beyond a certain point plants cannot use because now there's destruction. I said, no, that's not correct. Because I've seen the paper. The paper said beyond a certain point, if carbon dioxide increases, they don't say plants won't grow. They're saying the storms will increase according to our models, which is completely fake, as you know. The storms will increase and the storms will destroy the plants, so you will have less efficacy of the plant's absorption. You can see how the lie works. But nobody goes to the original paper. They come to the conclusion and pile on the conclusion. Yes, of course, when carbon dioxide grows, plants will grow. After a point, though, plants will die. Not because of carbon dioxide, supposedly because of a storm which will destroy the plants. A lie. Yes, it's based on models which you have tweaked and played with. So I'm showing you the weaknesses and meaninglessness of this kind of a modeling, especially with regard to carbon, because carbon is part of the life cycle. Nature adjusts, increases plant growth to absorb, and she will balance out carbon dioxide. So all this I've given you first as a big picture. Now I'm going to look at the whole question of, is carbon dioxide a problem? Is it human carbon dioxide? And let's look at this in a little more detail. And I'm going to ask all of you a question. Think about this. After all the propaganda you've heard and all the alarmism of carbon dioxide being bad, what do you think is the actual proportion of carbon dioxide in the air that we breathe? Remember, you're breathing out carbon dioxide, isn't it? In your room, in your bedroom, it's full of carbon dioxide, which you're breathing out, right? You go into a forest at night, it's full of carbon dioxide. How much is the carbon dioxide in the air? Just make a rough guess. It doesn't have to be a scientific guess. What's your impression created by all this alarmist propaganda? 20%? 10%? Nah, maybe less, much less. 5%? No, it's less. 1%? No, it has to be more, right? No, it's much less. The actual proportion of carbon dioxide in the air is 0.04%. Did that shock you? I hope it did. Because if you double that, double the carbon dioxide in the air, it's going to be 0.08%. And you want to tell me the earth will become like Venus, a hot house where metal will melt because of 0.08% carbon dioxide in the air? Well, that variation of doubling of carbon dioxide will not change the heat as much as the quantity of humidity, which varies anything in Pondicherry from 60% to 100%. 40% of the air variation of humidity will be there. Or if you take absolute terms of water in the air, typically average it out and you will get something like 4% variation compared to 0.04%. And humidity or water in the air is a so-called greenhouse gas. In other words, it traps water, it traps heat. So the variation of humidity is 100 times, is it? Or 1,000 times? What is it? 100 times more than your carbon dioxide variation in the worst extreme. And somehow you're supposed to believe that thing is actually going to change the temperature of the earth. Yes, so there's a whole rationale behind it. Maybe when that goes up slightly, it triggers a chain reaction which causes another chain, which causes another change, and maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 steps down, it will raise the temperature. I'm sorry, that's not science. That is speculation and that is modeling. Speculative modeling. So I've put a particular link which is about the sensitivity of temperature to carbon variations. And that will give you a clearer picture. I won't go into the technicalities of it, just to tell you that it's not true. Comes now the next issue, because they keep telling you the world's temperature is rising. How do you measure the average of the world? If you take an average, let's say I have a surface area, what's the average? Maybe some colors or some quantity of material. What's the average distribution? Then you measure everything, divide by the quantity. That gives you an average. If you want average of the earth, you have to measure every single spot on the earth, including the atmosphere, because you want the average of the atmosphere, and divide by the whole. You can't do that. Because the places that we measure on the earth, let's say for example, even in India, how many actual monitoring stations are there for temperature? Let's assume every city has one. Let's assume every city has 10. 10 spread out over an entire city is not even an average for the city. Because if your station is near a tree or near a park, it will give a completely different temperature from barely 500 meters away, a measuring station which is on the bare concrete. The average of that has no meaning scientifically. Averaging out temperature measurements across a city or across a country or across the earth is ridiculous and stupid, scientifically flawed. Wrong statistics. One of the things which you see happening, the measuring stations for temperature are increasingly approached by barren land in cities. So let's say you had put a measuring station on the outskirts of the city. As development grows, you have roads, concrete covering up, and now it gets warmer and warmer at the point of the measuring station. Or as somebody has done the research to show that measuring stations have been moved to come closer and closer to airports. The result is global average shoots up because your measuring point has been brought closer to a barren patch of cement, which naturally becomes much hotter than a patch of greenery. So there are ways by which even these measurements can be played, and the statistics, as I've explained, which are not scientific, can still be gamed easily. And this is actually being done. As I've told you, there is evidence people have done this. And I've saved all those links somewhere, but I don't have the time to find those. It's all in the last few years. I don't have the time to find those, but you can do your own research. You will find these quite easily. So the first question, of course, I've shown you that with the carbon dioxide being 0.04% in itself is not an issue. And as I said, it is a part of life cycle. Earth, nature has her way of balancing it out. Doesn't matter if it's more or less, it'll get corrected one way or other. The issue of average global temperature is also completely wrong because there is no way to do it. And the same with the sea levels. Where do you get an average sea level? How do you measure that? At every moment the water is fluctuating. Where do you get an average? So you average it out, measure, moment to moment, second to second, across the entire year. Okay, and divide by number of seconds, and you will get your approximate average. Except that average of the year is fluctuating every year. There is no pattern. It's not growing naturally. It's not growing steadily. Except in a few places where you have kind of gamed the system. But if you average that across the earth, you again get something which is completely meaningless. You've gamed the system because in some places there is actually a rising of the land and a falling of the land. The actual quantity, assuming it is part of the game system, and I'll just go with the actual measurements which is accepted in the norm in this issue. The actual measurement is so small that in the next 100 years, if it continued in the same track, you would go up by a few millimeters in all. I don't remember how much, 10 centimeters or something in all over the next 100 years. If it continued to grow in a straight line, except it does not. And at any point there could be a reversal because of other reasons where suddenly the temperatures cool down. And let me give an example, because I've actually said this in some of the meetings in the UN, where I said, look, it's Mother Earth. She has her own way of managing her balance, and all she has to do is have one volcanic eruption where the top of the volcano explodes, boom, just one, overnight. It will throw so much dust in the upper atmosphere that it will form a reflective layer, and there will be a dramatic cooling of temperatures across the earth into what is called a nuclear winter. All it takes is one large explosion throwing up enough dust. Do you think Earth cannot manage that? If she decides, no, you guys have heated it too much, I'm going to correct it. And if the domain is only carbon, it's not a problem, remember. And she will do it. And I think all of us here will accept that we know Mother Earth is conscious. And the ecology itself is held in conscious balance. Or there are beings who look after it and maintain the balance. Otherwise you cannot explain the complexity and interdependence of a rich forest life. So, global temperatures, like I said, from satellite and ground, completely different. You have no way to actually get an actual average. Bad statistics. Sea level rising, like I said, again that is not reliable, but let's assume whatever is considered normal and project it. You will get an article about this in the links I have provided. But you see, the game being played is not even that. What they say, this is the hottest summer in the last 20 years. Why? Because in one part the momentary peak of temperature went much higher. Why? Because we have cut down so many trees in the cities that the cities get hot. So in Pondicherry, let's say we have a certain temperature, let's say 30 degrees centigrade. You go to Auroville and it's typically 2 or 3 or 4 even temperature degrees lower than the city, a few kilometers away. Why? Because it's full of greenery. In Pondicherry, you go to the park and it's 2 degrees lower than if you come out barely 20 meters away and stand on the road. Where did you measure it? In fact, the joke is in Tamil Nadu we have snow in many of the hill stations. So if you follow that trend, you will say there is actually cooling happening in the south of India. And why am I highlighting this in particular? Because the mother had actually said that there will be snow in Auroville once the Matri Mandir is built and you have dug out the lake around and piled the sand of the lake to the north side, building an artificial hill. She said, put fir trees because there will be snow. We might actually see that within the next 10 years. I shouldn't speculate, but we are already heading in that direction. If you look at these signs, if you look at the media, they are playing you with those peak moments. Every summer has been hot. I remember Pondicherry being far hotter than before. I actually find it cooler nowadays. or the period of extreme heat is much shorter. It used to be 2 months of extreme heat, now it's almost 15 days of extreme heat. I have not changed. I've become more sensitive maybe with age. That's my observation. I've not done data studies, so I will not say anything beyond that. But the reality is, in many places we find the extreme cold is becoming warmer, so there is melting of glaciers, but extreme heat is becoming cooler. And this goes more close to what the mother described as the earth becoming more temperate over the years. And this is linked to something else which began in 1956. I've mentioned it in one of the discussions we had with Narad now 3 years ago. There's something called the global dimming. Beginning 1956, the total quantity of sunlight reaching the Earth's surface has been dropping consistently in a straight line. Every decade, it's been dropping by a certain number of percent. Now I don't remember. Straight line, just dropping. And in some places in Siberia, I believe it has dropped nearly 25% at the time when I saw this report, which is more than 10 or 15 years ago. What is that due to? There is no explanation. There is no scientific understanding of this with all the observations we make. What is happening? We don't know. I have my own theories. I believe it has something to do also with the nuclear weapons. The nuclear bombs exploded during that period. But you could also look at it from the scientific perspective, and the supramental consciousness descending in 1956, suddenly a whole chain starts. And I don't see a contradiction between these two because of the observation that the mother and Sri Aurobindo made, that the supramental consciousness can use any means to further its outcomes. And the mother specifically said the result of this would be a more temperate earth. So I actually see things going in that direction, but let's set that aside as my personal view. I'm not putting that as the part of discussion on science. But I'm showing you how you have been lied to by comparing with previous peaks momentarily in a particular spot. You look for the place where there is the highest peak compared to last 10 years, and they'll say, in the last decade it's the hottest summer in X spot for one day. What's the average? Average is a totally different story, but they won't tell you that. Or in the news reports, when they will show you heat, they will show colors which are yellow and orange. With the same temperatures 10 years ago would be shown green and blue. So by playing with the visuals, you're given an impression as if everything has become more hot, but they're pretty much the same in the average. So now we come to the further question, is this change of weather or of carbon dioxide, even assuming that is an issue, part of or caused by human beings, or is it part of something larger in nature? Like I said, we have just come out of a very cold spell of 100,000 years of ice age in the world, and we have only completed about 10,000 years of that. So from that ice age, temperature has been rising pretty much steadily. If you look at that as your reference, it is to be expected. Does it tie to industrial growth? Yes, perhaps. In some way, to some degree, but to me that seems to be rather the measure of how many trees we have cut and how much of our cities have become flat concrete, which heats up and therefore causes higher temperatures. When Delhi becomes a furnace in extreme summer, it's because you've cut your trees and replaced with this concrete which heats up the air above it. The same thing had it been brown soil. It would absorb the water, you would recharge your aquifers, but also at the same time, it would absorb the heat and not heat the air. And the whole Delhi temperature would be different and your story would not fit. So you want a solution, start planting trees and stop cutting trees. And immediately, Auroville is a great example. Go to Auroville as it was when Narad first came, and remember the heat, go today, and the same summer, it's a completely different story. So yes, human beings have been responsible to a great extent, but for what large part of it is cutting trees or creating these flat surfaces which heat the air rather than absorb the heat into the ground. Climate models, as I've said, are unreliable, do not trust. And you'll find much more data in the link I've provided. So climate scientists need research approvals, they need funding, they have to play along with the game. Peer review in science is one of those very big blocks for progress, because the moment you have a breakthrough paper, the peer review represents the average, it'll question and suppress. And I know this because I have friends who are in the industry in real research of science, and I know, for example, I would hear from them, we've just done this fantastic breakthrough, it's going to be published now, they've submitted, and the peer review rejects it, saying that it's not possible. And it's actually been done by some of the brightest minds in the world. And the peer review is an average which is refusing this, because it's all done anonymously. So you don't even know who the reviewers are. And it's easy to game the peer review process to suppress and navigate the direction of scientific exploration in the safe path decided by the cabal, and not have breakthroughs going in other directions. And you have to understand this. This is one of the reasons why we have not had any significant scientific breakthrough. Technology, yes, but no scientific breakthrough. When that whole story had come out in the late 80s, 89, if I remember right, with what was called tabletop fusion, where you could actually produce what seemed to be a fusion effect by some scientists by using certain metals. I have seen reports of governments, Japan and other countries, validating the effect and then putting money to build on it. And then they all went silent after a while. Tabletop fusion was discarded, viciously attacked. It came back by the back door in a term called low energy nuclear reaction, LENR, LENR. And that's actually going on as a research, but not part of mainstream. The effect is validated, you have scientific papers published about it, but it's never harnessed as a source of meaningful energy. And then, cabal stepped in to ensure this won't happen, and so on. So peer review, and then the protection of the careers, you're not even allowed to speak up. As happened during the COVID and the lockdown, so many doctors who spoke up against the irrational and non-scientific, non-medical advice being given, they were all suppressed or cancelled and so on. So, now we come to some of the solutions being proposed by the cabal. I've said Bill Gates actually said cut and bury the trees, sequestering carbon, etc. So other solutions, which are wind energy and solar power, I want to just touch upon to show you that it's not really doable. Elon Musk, for example, says that you can have 100 miles square of surface of solar cells is enough to power the entire United States. Yes, technically, when the sun is bright. What happens at night? Well, you have to store. So you have to have storage technologies, you have to have batteries, and those have been controlled to be kept very low in efficiency. The cost of mining, destruction of ecosystem to produce so many batteries, replacing the batteries every few years, all of this requires oil. So you're effectively leveraging oil economy, producing far greater pollution and destruction of environment, waste plastic, and the subsidy paid by the oil economy, etc. The same with solar power, I won't repeat that. Dams which destroy the ecosystem I have touched upon. Fossil fuels, as it is a misnomer, I have said this before, because actually the oil wells regenerate because it's bacterial growth inside. Yes, those are a kind of a renewable energy, although destructive in some way, not because of carbon dioxide, but because of other sulfurous poisonous fumes, which are also relatively small. And they are easy to manage with very simple means. They are not being tapped. Nobody is speaking about the actual destruction of the environment and the poisoning of the environment. And one of the last solutions offered, nuclear power or nuclear fusion. Nuclear power, as we said, is not a long term, but nuclear fusion was supposed to be clean energy. And again, I'm telling you this from my experience going back 40 years, because I've been watching this 1980 onwards. Every time they said, in the next 20 years, we will have a breakthrough. By the year 2000, it will be nuclear fusion, which will rule the world. And every time we approach that, it's pushed back another decade, another decade. And now they tell you nuclear fusion after 30 years. I've put a link which explains very scientific terms, hardcore science of why nuclear fusion is impractical. It doesn't matter even if you do it the correct way, even if you make the technology, why it's impractical has totally, completely different reasons. Do look at that video, it'll blow your mind. It'll make you realize that for the last 40 years, they've been lying to you so grandiosely. Such a big lie that you could not imagine that they would be lying, because the data given was valid and known even 40 years ago. Take a look at those. It's an interesting presentation. It's very short. I think you'll enjoy it. So, what are actual solutions? The future is electric. We have to go electric. Tesla foresaw this 100 years ago with an article called The Problem of Increasing Human Energy. And there he said the solution is to tap into the very wheelwork of nature and draw the energy the way nature herself uses it. The technologies exist. I'm going to speak about this maybe next time a little bit. I hope to provide a more detailed description of this. We'll see how that works, but I plan to. What is more serious? And this is the environmental crisis. It's not carbon dioxide. It's the poisoning of life. Your birds are dying because their shells break because of the pesticides you put into the soil. They eat the worm or the plants, and the pesticide going into their system weakens the eggshell. The eggs cannot hatch, they break. You're killing life at its birth. Bees are dying and the butterflies are dying. I remember going into nature in summer and being surrounded by tiny, tiny, tiny little buzzing insects, all pollinating flowers freely. Today you go, you're lucky if you see one butterfly passing by. You're lucky if you see that. And that's because there's been a huge collapse of the ecosystem at the level of life fertilization. These are the beings who fertilize, pollinate the flowers. Go further down into the microbiome, there is a collapse of the microbiome which used to be rich, teeming with bacteria because of the pesticides and the aggressive use of certain fertilizers which destroy the bacteria. You've killed the microbiome. Soil is becoming barren. Punjab, which used to be the most rich soil at one point, is now largely, in large parts, becoming barren. You need to pump more chemicals to keep them going. And we're doing this everywhere. Look at Pondicherry. You had to travel barely 5 minutes and you had green fields, all now covered in concrete. This was fertile soil covered in concrete. And you're pushed now to areas which were not fertile and trying to make them fertile. It's pure mismanagement. There were ways to manage this differently. So I'm not going to speak about that now. You look at the pumping of these same chemicals which are now affecting the cells and the DNA structure and its replication, leading to cancer. Reducing fertility because of the hormones being pumped into the water. For example, the female hormone used for as a birth control pill. The hormone survives through the body, goes through the urine into the city wastewater, and through the recycling process, the hormone is not removed, eventually comes back into the tap water or groundwater. The result is now every human being who's drinking that water is actually taking the pill, so to say, on a hormonal level, reducing effectively the fertility of human beings but also of all animals. And just that being pumped through the wastewater of the city after processing, because you can't remove the hormone, into the lakes in the US, which is one of the cleanest in the world, and India is far more filthy in the lakes, at least 100 times worse. In city of Bangalore, the foam of industrial waste catches fire spontaneously in the lake. You see a fire on the lake. Isn't that a joke? US is far cleaner with all the standards. And there you have the fish changing sex because of the human hormone pumped into the water. Male fish having female glands and female fish having male glands and so on. This is destroying life. This is a real problem. This is the environmental crisis. Carbon dioxide is not. Nobody's talking about it. And this is serious because you're killing life. Hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors in our foods, which are being deliberately inserted in the foods to make them more tasty or to make you crave or to preserve or whatever it is. Or simply as waste products leaking in through the environment of the plastics you produced and coming into your food, into your water. I've seen people drink from a water jug of plastic which was leaching like crazy. You smelt the water, it was full of the estrogen mimic. And I said to the person, you're going to damage your health from this. And he looked at me blankly as if I was stupid and just went on drinking. We should have passed laws. Any plastic that touches water or food must be BPA free, free from all these leaching tendencies. All the cold drinks, soft drinks that you drink in plastic bottles are being transported, bared to the sun, and there is the breakdown of the plastic from the ultraviolet rays. It's all leaching into the water. The water is full of pesticide as well as plastic poisons, which are hormone and endocrine disruptors. So, coming back to this, the real problem is an environmental breakdown which not only is destroying the fertility of life, destroying hormones and endocrines, but children are having diabetes, heart disease and cancer as children. I'm still old enough. In 1980s, in a movie you had cancer, one person getting cancer, and it was a big story. Nobody even knew what it was. Today, every family is almost touched by cancer. Children are having cancer. Why? Because of the poisoning of the environment and the collapse of the ecology from poisoning, not from carbon dioxide. So we have a serious crisis. Carbon dioxide is not a part of the problem at all. And all the carbon tax and all the stories told to you about reducing carbon is false. Do not believe that. Do not fall into that game. You have to reduce your poison footprint, not carbon footprint. And poison footprint is happening through the plastics, and this cannot be done unless we pass laws to make everything sustainable, recyclable, reusable, and not allow any production of plastic which will be thrown that will become a hormone disruptor in nature, in water, in air or soil. And it's easy to do. The technologies all exist. But consider how much energy is being pushed to cut carbon dioxide, which is life cycle, and not touch these. So this is what I want to conclude with. I will have something more positive coming up next time or time after. We'll see how that works. With a vision of what is possible technologically with given current technologies as well as the future potential. But understand here, temperature rise is not a problem. Mother Earth can correct easily overnight, as I said, push you into a nuclear winter if you want. Not a problem at all. Carbon dioxide is not a problem at all. The poisoning of the ocean by the industrial waste you're pumping, yes, that is killing fish. That is killing corals. But again, you see what nature is doing, and I've put a link there. There's actually a bacteria which is growing now to counter and assist the corals to grow, and this has been found recently, and I give an example of with a link there, just to show you that Mother Earth can actually do so much more if we take a little bit of effort to align ourselves with her and not destroy her life cycles. So I think that's about all I want to speak about with this. Quickly looking at the chat box. Yes, so there are sodium-based cells and hydrocarbon cells, etc. There are various kinds of storage cells. In fact, I found in IIT Madras they had produced an iron-based battery cell, which means iron is of course the most plentiful material. At the end, it's just rusted iron. You can literally replace the battery cell and throw it away, and it would not cause any damage to the environment. They demonstrated it. Okay, and I don't care if it is producing 1/10 the storage capacity, because you can replace it 10 times in your car journey just swapping it out. It's so cheap. But nobody's going to make money in mining or in controlling these rare earth metals, which are what raise the battery prices, which is what poisons the environment and destroys the ecology by mining. Nobody's going to make money. Nobody can control it. So the technology does not receive the investment that is due to it. And I believe with a little bit of investment, that technology could have been perfected. You would have batteries made of iron as your primary chemical. And those would be so safe, so convenient, and literally you could throw them away without fear. This is all possible. The technologies exist. We just need to direct our energies in the right direction. So another question from Amsi, is hydrogen a good renewable source? I don't believe so. Because what I've seen, and this is from the hard science, hydrogen is the finest, smallest atom. It leaks out of everything. You can store it in a thick-walled metal. The metal becomes so heavy, it's going to leak out. That's the nature of the hydrogen. And it's so dangerous. If you open it, it combines, it's the most reactive substance. It combines with oxygen to produce the most large explosion. So if you have a head-on collision and the hydrogen tank cracks, you will have a humongous explosion like a full power bomb. The most dangerous. Are you going to wait? This is common sense. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I read this 40 years ago. Are you telling me that today you're going to find a way to ensure that even if there's a collision, the hydrogen tank won't burst? And with what? You need such thick iron that the car's weight will be half the weight will be the tank. And they're going to replace it by using these plastic, what do you call them, fiberglass tanks. Where do you dispose of the fiberglass? You look at all the effects, and there's still no guarantee that it will not crack if there's a head-on collision. So hydrogen to me is extremely dangerous. And how do you produce hydrogen? How do you separate oxygen and hydrogen from water? By pumping electricity. In other words, to produce the hydrogen, you will have to produce electricity first using what? Either solar power or wind power or your petroleum. Which is cheaper? Well, you'll go petroleum. Otherwise, your hydrogen price will be so much higher than your solar power because you're going through one step more of processing. If solar power is inefficient, building hydrogen out of it will be 1/10. So you will take electricity from solar cells and go 1/10 the efficiency to produce hydrogen, which will then be pumped into a car. You see how ridiculous it is. Eventually you need electricity to produce the hydrogen. How else will you produce it? And any technology you use to produce the electricity, this will be less efficient than that, the cost being increased because of all these. So it's not a solution. And this is common sense what I'm speaking of. It's all virtue signaling when the government says we have pumped so many crores into hydrogen technologies. It will all be subsidized to show you, yes, it's cost effective because it's subsidized. Look at the logic of the chain required. It does not make sense. So I think for the moment, this is all I'm going to stop with. I'm sorry, it's largely a message of waking you up from the lies you've been told, but turn to the real problem, which is the poisoning and destruction of the life cycles by human action. And this is not part of a larger natural rhythm of temperatures or sea levels or any of those. Dwarika is underwater, 10 kilometers under the sea. Not because of human beings, but by natural processes. Sea level rising is a natural process, or falling is a natural process. Nothing to worry for us. Poisoning of the environment is the first time in a few million years that probably we are doing this grade of poisoning of environment on this scale across the world, where everybody in every family is touched by the fear or cancer one way or other. At the level of its children, we have such serious illnesses. Why isn't any step being taken to set this right? And this tells you that the system is under control of a hostile cabal that is antithetical to human life and to evolutionary purpose. It is this mindset that has to be defeated. We have to regain the control of our environment and realign ourselves with nature and use healthy technologies for which the technology exists. We do not need to make ourselves poor. We do not need to start living a barren life. The plenitude given by the intelligence and science is intended for the flowering out of life. Poverty and further taxation based on the falsehood of carbon is not the solution forward. Correct technologies which are non-polluting and renewable as technologies, as materials, that's the way forward. And it's all doable given existing technologies and sciences and capabilities. So I'm going to end with this, and just one quick announcement. Tomorrow, for those of you who are in Pondicherry, we have a lecture at the Hotel Shenbaga starting at 9 in the morning on the theme of the out-of-body experience by Mark Oburn, of whom I've spoken before. And the English translation of his book is going to be released tomorrow. And I'll speak about it next time. I'll share a link for those who want to get it from elsewhere. This will be important. If you can attend, do attend. So that's an announcement. Coming back to our theme, come back to nature. The intelligence given has to be aligned to nature's processes. We have to push forward with the correct steps. There is an environmental crisis. It is solvable. But for that, we have to stop believing the media and stop allowing ourselves to be run by cabal interests which want to destroy life. What can we do? What are the options? Maybe a separate discussion, but start thinking about it and start taking steps. And for this purpose, Mother Earth is conscious being. She is helping you. She is even producing bacteria which eat up plastics. So she'll solve the problem. Maybe it'll take 1,000 years. But we don't need to give her that problem. We can ourselves correct the plastics now. So start with your life, make the small changes. And let's make this our intention, that whatever we do in our life, we put priority on living in a way that is less destructive and less poisoning of the environment. Become conscious of it. Do not worry about carbon dioxide or temperatures. That's not a problem at all. And we can ask the Mother, Earth and Divine Mother, for the right knowledge and for the right means to correct furthest destruction.